Today we're going to be working on summarizing all of our factoring methods. We've covered 6 different types and we've covered 5 different methods of factoring. So today, factoring a general strategy. Our main idea today is to factor a polynomial completely using a combination of methods. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and summarize everything you've covered up to this point. So summary of our factoring methods. The first factoring method that you went over was the GCF, which was constructing a ladder and factoring out common factors. At the end, we gathered all those factors together and created our GCF, or greatest common factor. The second method that you covered was dots, or difference of two squares. There was a pattern to recognize. It was always first square minus a last square. Okay? Our third method was known as our PST, or perfect square trinomial. And that was another pattern to recognize. You had to know your squares. The first was a square, the last was a square, and the middle was a double of the first times last. And it was either positive or negative based on the sign in the middle of your binomial. The fourth method that we covered was grouping when we had 4 terms. We basically took all the 4 terms and put it in a box. So we called it our box, and it was 2 by 2. 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom, and we factored it. And our fifth method was a trinomial ax squared plus bx plus c, or just x squared plus bx plus c. And what did we do for that one? We did the x box, which was our diamond, and then we put all the pieces in the box to factor. So, how do all of these methods fit together? Well, we're going to go ahead and go over the guidelines for factoring, basically a step-by-step checklist on how to factor. So pause as you need to as we review this. So, guidelines. The first thing that you will always do when you factor is, number 1, you always must factor out the GCF. Okay? In other words, do the ladder first. If you cannot factor anything out using the ladder, then move ahead to the next step. The second step, if you have 2 terms left, so be sure after you do your factoring, your GCF factoring, count how many terms you have left. If you have 2 terms left, then look for dots. See if the first is a square and the last is a square, with 1 minus sign either in between or in the front. If so, you can factor it as first plus last times first minus last. Then, of course, we always must check that one with the subtraction sign because it is a difference, and you could have dots again, and again, and again, and again. We could have double dots, triple dots, and so on. So always check to see if you have more dots. Method number 3. Okay, step number 3. Step number 3, if you have 3 terms left, you are going to check for, guess what? PST, which was our next method. If you have a PST, what would it look like? Well, you would see if there's a first that's a square, the last that's a square, and the middle is a double of the first times last. And of course, that sign depends on the middle of this binomial. Okay? If you have a positive in your trinomial, you're going to get a positive in your binomial. If you're going to have a negative in the middle term, then you'll have a negative for the middle of this binomial. So check your signs. They should always match. The middle should always match the middle here. And of course, when you're done, check and see if you have dots again. We always need to check for dots again. Those little things always hide out in all of our problems. The fourth method that we used, also the fourth item on our checklist, we need to check for if you still have 3 terms left and you know it's not a PST, then we need to factor using Xbox. And just a reminder what Xbox looks like. Remember that you had your X and your box. The X was also known as the diamond. we always put our product on the top and our sum on the bottom, and our factors were on the sides. And once we figured out our factors, we put the 4 terms back in the box. Okay, and then we factored it and came up with binomials. It could be something plus something, could be something minus something. Okay, it depends on what you had when you factored it. And always check for dots again. They could be hiding out even in the X box. And then our 5th method is when you have 4 terms left. So let's say you took your GCF out and you have 4 terms. Then look at your 4 terms and see if you can put them in the box. And picture of the box again. Stick all your pieces in the box and factor it and come up with your 2 binomials. Okay? And of course, check for dots again. And then the last thing always, which you should always do, is check your work by multiplying all the factors. Now that we've reviewed all of our factoring methods and we have a general checklist for what to do, this is what the grand picture looks like. Okay? This is called a flowchart. Flowcharts are actually used widely in engineering. It's also used in many other fields where people have many steps to go through. Perhaps you've seen a flowchart playing a video game, and the flowchart looks like this. So it's basically a big picture of how everything fits together. So when we have our flowchart, what we're going to do is number 1, just like our steps, we're going to check for the GCF and factor out the GCF. Then the next step would be count the terms that you have left. You count your terms. You either have 2 terms, 3 terms, or 4 terms left. If you should have 2 terms, then we need to go ahead and find out if it is in fact dots. Okay? So if you have dots, you're going to go ahead and factor it. First squared minus last squared. If so, then yes, you factor it and you get 2 binomials. First minus last, first plus last. Okay? And always check again. Do you have dots again? If the answer is yes, you have dots again, you must go through the cycle and do it again. Then you're going to check again to see if you have it again. If it happens to be no, then you go this way and you stop. But of course, if it is dots again, you go through it again. So it's kind of like a cycle. You go back and forth like a circle. Okay? If you have 3 terms, first thing you're going to check is to see if you have a PST. Is the first a square? Is the last a square? Do you have a double of the middle, first times last? If so, then you'll have a binomial. First plus last, first minus last. Okay? Depends on the sign in the middle again. It always depends on the middle term. Okay? If it is not a PST, then you're going to go ahead and check using, of course, the X box. Okay? The X box is the method that we use for trinomials that we are unsure of. Okay? So if you can't recognize PSTs or if it slips through by accident, we'll catch it when we do our X box. And finally, if there are 4 terms, we're going to go ahead and group it 2 by 2 and use the box method. Now, you're probably wondering what all these little arrows are on this flowchart. Flowcharts flow, they move, so they go through and they divert you to the next step. So when we're counting our terms, if it's 2, you go down this path. Dots, yes. Then you factor it, check, and dots again. If so, you keep going through. If it's no, we stop. For a PST, if it is, you factor it. If it's not, then you check using Xbox. And when you finish doing your Xbox, perhaps you have a binomial and you need to go back and check to see if that's a dots, because it's possible that you'll have a dots hidden in there. And then grouping. If you have 4 terms, you're going to group it 2 by 2. Then once you have your 2 binomials, you're going to check those binomials and check and see if those are dots. That's what this arrow is for, to check and see if it's dots again. If so, we have to go through this entire cycle again. Okay? And if it's not, then we can go up and stop. Okay? So that is how the flowchart works. Okay? So let's go ahead and give this a try. We're going to go ahead and do some examples right now. Keep your flowchart handy. Keep your checklist handy. Okay? So example number 1, let's give this one a try. We're going to go ahead and factor this completely. So take a look at your flowchart or your guideline, whichever works for you. And let's take a look. Our first step, what should we do? Check for GCF. Did I hear that? And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to check for GCF first. 48 and 3. I think we can take something out. Let's go ahead and do our ladder. What can we factor out? 3. 3 goes into both of them. So I'm going to take out the 3, leaving me with 16c to the 4th minus 1. Now when I'm at this stage, I cannot factor another GCF out, so what I have is 3 times 16c to the 4th minus 1. Now, according to my flowchart and my checklist, after I factor out that GCF, I need to count how many terms I have. I have 2 terms, so what should I do? Following my flowchart, it says if I have 2 terms, try dots. Well, let's see. Is this dots? Is the first a square? Is the last a square? Do I, in fact, have a minus sign? I do. And that first happens to be 4c squared squared. 1 happens to be 1 squared. So indeed, I do have dots. So I need to factor this out. This would become 4c squared plus 1 times 4c squared minus 1. And don't forget, you did have that GCF. Don't forget to bring that down. So now that I've factored that, of course, in my flowchart it says I should check for dots again, and that's what I will do. Remember that you do not need to check the one that has positives on both of them. We have no such thing as SOTs. Sums, we don't have those. We have dots, difference of 2 squares. So we're going to check the one with the minus sign. Is the first a square again? Is the last a square again? I have my minus sign. 4c squared happens to be 2c, quantity squared. 1 happens to be 1 squared. Guess what? I have a dots again. So now I have 2c plus 1 times 2c minus 1. Don't forget everyone that we have left behind. We need to bring everyone down to join the party here. 3 times the quantity 4c to the second plus 1 times 2c plus 1 times the quantity of 2c minus 1. And of course, again, I should check this last one more time. Do I have another dots? Is 2c a square? I don't think so. I guess I'm done. This would be my final answer. Okay? So it's your turn. Go ahead and give this one a try on your worksheet. Go ahead and try problem number 2. Okay, pause here and try on your worksheet using several methods. Okay, let's go ahead and go to example number 2. Example number 2, we're going to go ahead and factor this one completely. So we're going to follow our flowchart again. Okay, and it says, of course, first thing, always GCF. Is there something in common here? I see a factor of 2 hiding out. I can take out a 2. 2 goes in here, m to the 4, minus 2 goes in here 25 times, m squared. 2 goes into 288, 144 times. There we go. And then I take a look, no more GCF. They only have 1 in common. So now I have 2 times the quantity, m to the 4th minus 25m squared plus 144. Now I need to go back to my flowchart. It says, hey, count your terms. I've got 1, 2, 3 terms, so I should check and see if this is a PST. Is the first a square? I think it is. M to the 2nd squared is m to the 4th. 144 is one that I know also. That happens to be 12 squared. And if I take a look at that middle term, it says it's a minus, so this will be a negative sign. Now I'm going to check that middle. Do I have 2 times the first times the last? This happens to be 2 times m squared times a negative 12, which comes out to negative 24m squared. So I'm going to check. Does this happen to be the same thing as this? And the answer, unfortunately, is no, it's not. So this is not a PST. So now what should I do? Well, going back to my flowchart, it says I should go ahead and try checking using an X box. Okay, so I'm going to take my original problem here, m to the 4th minus 25m squared plus 144. I'm going to put this in an X box now. Okay, I'm going to take this portion and use my diamond or my X. My product is 144 times 1, which is 144, and my sum is negative 25. So now I'm going to go ahead and start brainstorming. What times what will give me 144 yet add up to a negative 25? Well, since it has to add up to negative 25, I know it has to be two negatives because my product is positive, so these are both going to be negative. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start listing what are the possible things here. Well, it could be 1 times 144. That's too big. 2 times 72. That won't work. 3 times 48. Still too big. 4 times 36. That won't work either, although I'm getting close. How about 6 times 24? That's still too big. How about 8 times 18? Will that one work? Nope. But I'm getting really close because if these were both negatives, they would both come up to negative 26. I'd be really close. Then does 9 go in? 9 goes in. 9 goes in 16 times. And that happens to be my 25. The last one would be 12 times 12. So the only one that happens to work is my 9 times 16. So I would have negative 9 times a negative 16. So I'm going to take this, and since I have m squared, that must mean this was negative 9m squared, negative 16m squared. So now I'm going to replace these for my middle term. So I have m to the 4th minus 9m squared minus 16m squared plus 144. And now I'm going to take this part and put it in my box. Okay, so let me set up my box right now. M to the 4th, negative 9m squared, negative 16m squared, and a positive 144. So now I'm going to go ahead and factor. Going across, I've got m squared, and across the bottom, that 144 did have a factor of 16, didn't it? Take a look back here. It was 9. So yes, it does go in. 16 goes in, and since this starts with a negative, I'm going to take out a negative 16. Vertically, let's see, what times m squared will give me m to the 4th? M squared. That's a check. What times m squared will give me a negative 9m squared? Negative 9. That's a check. So I'm just going to verify now. Negative 16 times m squared, this works. Negative 16 times negative 9 is in fact 144. That works. So now I have m squared minus 16 times m squared minus 9. And don't forget, remember that GCF way up here? We need to bring her all the way back down here. So we have a GCF of 2. Now, we've done the X box. What should we do next? We should always check to see if we have some dots hiding out. So take a look at your binomial now. Do you have a minus sign? In fact, I do. Do we have 2 squares? And the answer is yes on that as well. So I've got a square here, m squared, and I've got a square here, a 4 squared. That happens to be a dots. That would be m plus 4 times an m minus 4. And over here, I happen to have another one. I have an m squared, and minus, this happens to be a 3 squared. So then I have m plus 3, and I have an m minus 3. Don't forget your GCF. So now check. We've got to keep checking because those little dots keep hiding out. M minus 4, is that a dots? 4 is a square, but m is not a square, so that's okay. And this one I have a minus sign again, but 3 is not a square. That happens to be prime. So this would be my final answer. So now it's your turn to give this a try. So go ahead and try on your worksheet again, problem number 26. Finally, our last example. Example number 3. Okay? Another factor completely. Now, you're probably used to going through that flow chart or going through that checklist with me. So as you look through that either flowchart or checklist, take a look. The first step again is always GCF. And this time we happen to have 4 terms. So is there a GCF for all of these 4 terms? Got a 2, got an 8, 6, 24, happens to be a 2. Let's take out that 2. So do our ladder, take out the 2. So now I have a squared b minus 4b plus 3a squared minus 12. And I can no longer take out any more common factors. So I have 2 times a squared b minus 4b plus 3a squared minus 12. Now, according to my flowchart, I'm going to count my terms. 1, 2, 3, 4 terms are remaining. Okay? So if I have 4 terms, I'm going to jump down to where it says grouping, because that's the only way I can do it when I have 4 terms. So I'm going to go ahead and put these 4 terms in a box. I've got a squared b, negative 4b, 3a squared, and a negative 12. So I'm going to start factoring. What do these two have in common? They both have a b, factor out a b. These two have a factor of 3. Now going vertically, I have b. What times b will make a squared b? A squared. So that's a check. What times b will give me a negative 4b? Negative 4. And that's a check. So let's verify the last 2 boxes. 3 times a squared will give me 3a squared. That works. 3 times negative 4 is negative 12, and that works. So what are my factors here? I've got a binomial factor of b plus 3, since this was a positive 3, times, across the top, I have a squared minus 4. And please don't forget your GCF. Bring your GCF down. Okay? Now, according to our flowchart, we should go back and check, do we have dots? So let's take a look at our binomials now. This one could not be a dots because there's no subtraction sign, there's no negative here. So we're going to roll that one out. What about this one? I have a minus sign. Do I have square minus a square? Is this a square? In fact, it is. Minus is 4 a square, and that is a square as well, so I've got dots hiding out. So this is a plus 2 and an a minus 2. And then don't forget to bring everyone else down, okay? 2 times a b plus 3. Of course, I should check again. Check this last one. Is the first a square? A is not a square, nor is 2. So we're safe. This would be factored completely, okay? So now it's your turn, your third try problem. Try number 21 from the worksheet, okay? Bring your 3 problems to class tomorrow, and we will discuss this more. See you tomorrow.